Hello, everyone. I think live looks like we are live. Welcome back to my channel. Before we start, just give us a sign that the sound is good, the video is good, because I have kind of delay here. So just 1 second before it clicks. I think we're good. Welcome, everyone. I have Scott Ritter with me back. I'm very, very grateful for Scott's time every single time. He's so busy, so many interviews. Just to let you know, to support Scott's work, all his books and his ventures in the near future, more coming. You can scroll down below this live stream, Scott Ritter Extra, subscribe there, and
It's
yes,
we changed it. It's now scottritter.com. We
all right,
yeah, we got a hold of that. So it's scottritter.com.
okay, perfect. So it's already down below there, and if you would like to support me, also all the links are down below this live stream. Welcome back, Scott. Thanks again for finding time for our conversation today.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Scott, let's start with what took place on Wednesday, May 15th. As all of us know, there was an association attack on the life of the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. I would like to ask you, who do you think is behind it, and how important is Slovakia in NATO's plan? What role it's supposed to play with this conflict in Ukraine? As we know that Robert Fico didn't want to send Slovakian troops to Ukraine. He announced it publicly. He actually informed the world about a plan that he was not willing to participate in. So I would like to know your thoughts. Who is behind this and what role is playing in this NATO plan?
Well, clearly we know who the attempted assassin was. He was a 71-year-old writer who was the political opponent. I mean, he was part of the section of Slovakian society opposed to Prime Minister Fico. So, and he has said straight up, admitted, I shot him because he denied Ukraine assistance. So we know what his motivations are. He's politically opposed to the prime minister, and the thing that apparently pushed him over the edge was the denial of military assistance to Ukraine. Um, who was behind the assassin? I don't think anybody was, to be honest. I think that this was purely a frustrated individual. Look, if professionals were behind it, Fico would be dead. This was not a professional attempt on his life. This was the act of a loner, um, taking advantage of a lax security scenario. Fico has a tendency to go out and talk to people after meetings. He makes himself publicly available in that nature, and I think that this guy said, "I'm just going to show up and shoot him," and he did. Now, the Minister of Interior for Slovakia has said that in the aftermath of the assassination attempt that Slovakia is on the edge of a civil war. And this, again, points to what I believe to be the loner theory. You have a country that's divided viscerally over not just the issue of Ukraine, but larger issues such as NATO, the European Union, the direction that Europe is going vis-a-vis Russia. Fico, together with Viktor Orban in Hungary and President Vucic in Serbia, have taken a position that they don't want to be part of this European move to confront Russia. That they believe that peaceful coexistence with Russia is not only possible but desirable. And so they have articulated opposition against a wide variety of anti-Russian policy initiatives, both in the European Union and in NATO. Now, the problem is they come from Eastern European countries that carry with them the memory of Soviet times, what many people articulate as Soviet occupation, and this translates into an anti-Russian posture on the part of many people. People are predisposed to be anti-Russian, and so even though you have quote unquote enlightened leadership in Hungary, Slovakia, and and Serbia, and you almost had enlightened leadership in Poland too. I mean, it was not a guarantee that Tusk was going to win the election there. So you see societies where you have, I think, deep-seated Russophobic sentiment that dates back to the times of the Soviet Union, clashing with realists who are looking at the situation realistically and say this is a needless confrontation that we don't need to be a part of. We shouldn't be a part of. And while we don't have to be the best friends with Russia, we don't have to be Russia's adversaries or enemies either. We can learn to peacefully coexist. And so societies are split in this. You see this in Poland, you see this in Slovakia, you even see this in the Czech Republic to a lesser degree, primarily because of Prague. I think Prague 1968 has shaped the public sentiment in the Czech Republic significantly. And you see this in Hungary, but you see this elsewhere too, in Moldova. There's a large pro-Russian segment of the society. In Romania, it's not a homogeneous opposition against Russia. There are people in Romania who articulate against. In Germany, you see this. In France, in Europe, there's a split. In most places, the split aligns primarily, with the majority aligning with pro-EU, pro-NATO positions. But in nations like Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia, the I won't call it anti-NATO, but the people who don't buy into this absolute necessity to confront Russia, they have attained a political majority. And the people that don't agree with them, this isn't a matter of, simple disagreement on, are we going to install a new sewage line, or are we going to install, are we going to put in laws about taxation? Those are normal political discourse where opposing points of view oftentimes emerge, and but they very rarely, hardly ever, maybe never, result in violence, political violence. This issue is much more the issue of Russia is a much more heated one and personal, because people have attached existential survival aspects to this issue. There are many in Europe who have forgotten what it means to be a Slovakian, a Czech citizen, a Polish citizen, Hungarian citizen. Instead, they identify themselves as Europeans, and they see anything that threatens the EU, the European Union, as being an existential threat to who they believe they are. And so when you have somebody like Prime Minister Fico come out against the European Union, Viktor Orban, these people, it's not just a political disagreement. This is a matter of existential survival. And these people who have attached themselves to the EU likewise attach themselves to NATO, which they see as the military arm of the same principles that the EU espouses. And so when people hesitate to confront Russia in the manner that NATO is encouraging to do so, they view this as an existential issue. And so I believe that this 71-year-old poet, this writer, who's clearly, an intelligent being, but he has allowed his emotions regarding the future of the EU, the future of NATO, and the future of Slovakia to be defined in existential terms, literally life and death. And so he made a decision that he's willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. And the dangerous thing here is that, as the Minister of Interior in Slovakia hinted, he's not alone. There are others out there who feel that the track, the path that Fico is on is a path that threatens Slovakia with its survival as a nation state, and that there are others out there in the wings waiting, who, if they wake up one morning and feel that there's no hope, that the direction of their nation is such that it threatens the very survival of the nation, are prepared to undertake drastic acts of political violence. And I think that's why the Minister of Defense talked about Slovakia being on the cusp of a civil war.
God, this is very interesting what you said. I was not expecting this actually, because I was thinking you will say it was Ukraine who influenced this man, because this man was actually, I remember there was a video I just saw yesterday. He was, I think, standing somewhere shouting, supporting Ukraine. I think in the beginning of the conflict. And then when I was watching, observing, and I'm not an expert, but the security guards, it was very strange positioning of the security and very like slow motion when it was all taking place. They were not reacting as you would probably expect them to react. So it's interesting that you said it, but I agree with sense of being more European than feeling you belong to country, which, yeah, that's European
But
Union. But
let me just add on the security side,
yeah,
having peripheral knowledge of this sort of thing. Um, if you don't train all the time, look, the U.S. Secret Service trains all the time. Their presidential security details train all the time. Every time the president goes out, it is a real world environment where they are doing their thing. Snipers deployed, advanced teams out there, and the guys around the president are scanning eyeballs, scanning hands, and they have a plan of action. They are put in specific places to protect the president. Um, and even then, as witnessed when Ronald Reagan got shot, you know, Hinckley got in close and pulled the trigger. And that's against the U.S. Secret Service, which is one of the best in the world at what they do. I'm not going to diminish the professionalism of these of the security detail for the prime minister, but I would say that they don't wake up every morning receiving intelligence briefings on the potential of taking of life. That the entire approach to politics in Slovakia is different than the American approach, and the mere fact that the prime minister could leave a meeting and approach a crowd. Did they have people in there? Because I can guarantee you, the Secret Service has people around that you don't even know about. There are people in the crowd pretending to be members of the crowd who are actually looking at handbags, looking at hands, and they're ready to jump in and take someone down. Snipers are deployed. As I said, the president moves in with a whole phalanx of layered defense. Vito just said, I'm going to go talk to these guys. And the security detail's like, well, he's done this a million times. La di da di da di da. Here they go to protect him. When the gunshots rang out, they weren't pre-programmed. They were sitting there going, holy cow, somebody's shooting a gun. The prime minister's hit. That's not how they reacted, is not the reaction of a personal security detail that lives its life on the edge. It's the reaction of, frankly speaking, a European security detail, which has become complacent to the possibility of political violence. I don't view this as a conspiracy. I just view this, go to the simplest thing. These guys weren't expecting an assassination attempt. They weren't equipped for it. They weren't organized for it. They weren't trained for it. Um, and you saw that with their reaction. It wasn't a well rehearsed reaction. They had no idea what they were doing. Guys were running around trying to figure out how to get them out of there, who's going to go on what car. Man, these are things that are rehearsed. You notice if a president shot, it's boom, 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 bam, you're gone. Here it's what happened. I'm a big fan of incompetence theory. What I mean by that is when we see things happen in life, rather than delving down into conspiracies, because conspiracies require a lot of professionalism, a lot of expertise, a lot of training. It's because most conspiracies are fairly complicated. I'm a big fan of just incompetence. I believe that the security detail was incompetence, just like if you remember when the former Japanese Prime Minister Abe was shot. He had a security detail. They had their fancy little ballistic briefcases. Look how long it took them to deploy the briefcase. If these guys woke up every morning rehearsing that action, shot, boom, nope, shot. Well, what's going on? Shot. 2 steps. Only too late did they put up the ballistic thing. By that time, the fatal bullet had been fired. Incompetence theory. That's my big thing in life. I believe that human beings are inherently lazy. We're inherently sloppy. We take shortcuts, and therefore we become slovenly in our approach to things that we shouldn't be. And unless you have an organization that has a mindset of professionalism from people make fun of Marines, and believe me, please do. We're good. We don't mind it. But one of the reasons why you make fun of us because we're pretty damn good at what we do. And one of the reasons why we're pretty damn good at what we do is that we do it over and over and over and over and over and over. And I could go on all year with the overs again till it's muscle memory, until it becomes second nature. How do you train somebody to assault through an ambush? An ambush means that the enemy is executed at a time and place when you're supposedly not expecting it. Now, if you go to ground in an ambush, you're in the kill zone. You're going to die. So the only way to survive an ambush is to immediately pivot to the source of fire and assault through, which is the last thing the human body wants to do when you're being shot at. Try and ambush a Marine Corps platoon. You'll get killed because they'll pivot through and they'll immediately get fire supremacy over you. They'll assault through you and they'll kill you all because you're not expecting that. Most people initiate an ambush expecting the enemy to go down. When the enemy pivots and starts laying down lethal fire on you and you are suppressed, you die. How do you train someone to do that? Over and over and over and over and over again. That security detail that was protecting Fitzo, they didn't train for anything. There was no automatic reaction. They were in a dull stupor, which shows laziness, lack of professionalism, lack of preparedness, incompetence.
Thank you, Scott. I respect your opinion. You know I do. I want to say to everyone who's watching, please hit this like because it helps to show the video to more viewers. Let's stay within Hungary and Viktor Orban. As we know that health condition of Prime Minister of Slovakia is still critical. He just went through another surgery, I read. And the next few days will be very, very important. Of course, Orban is bringing this, praying for his recovery. However, I'm quoting now Viktor Orban. If we look at this situation from a political standpoint, it is a horrible loss for Hungary, because even if the Prime Minister of Slovakia recovers, he will not be able to work for several months. And those upcoming months are extremely important for the future of Europe. And due to the upcoming, this is next month in June, European parliamentary elections and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Here I have two questions, Scott. First one is your thoughts on those upcoming months. And second is, I really have to ask you this because I don't understand. When there was a voting taking place in General Assembly in United Nations for Palestine full membership in the UN, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 countries. So USA, Israel, Argentina, Czech Republic, Hungary, Macedonia, Nauru, never heard of this country, Palau and Papua and New Guinea, they voted against. Why, in your opinion, Hungary voted against that?
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to be honest. I'm sure the answer is there. I mean, if I went into it, I'm sure Hungary has released statements explaining their vote, and then I'd dig around and read through that statement. There's a number of things that could be going on here. This is a critical vote from the United States, that the United States was asking for people to vote, and maybe Hungary thought that it would throw the U.S. a bone. That's one thing. Another thing would be I'd have to look into the specific philosophical aspects of the vote. Was there something about the measure that would run afoul of a hardline Hungarian foreign policy posture or stance? Again, I need to that in Hungary's own relationship with Israel and the Jews dating back to World War II. Could there be a fundamental issue? What is Hungary's voting record on issues of Israel? I mean, I'm asking all these questions because I don't know the answer that you put out there, but I'm fairly certain the answer is there if we just dig a little bit deeper into it. It was a vote that doesn't change the outcome of anything. Hungary voting for on the other side, the bottom line is the measure passed. The U.S. can't veto it because it's a General Assembly vote. So the measure passed. Hungary's vote didn't change the outcome, so maybe Hungary was just trying to score some much needed political points with the United States, so that they, you know, soften their the other attacks that are taking place. I don't know. I'd have to dig deeper into that. I think Orban's correct though. Fico, even if he survives, and as you pointed out, there's no guarantee he's going to survive. My understanding is that the bleeding isn't stopping, and that he's, you know, he's in his health is still very much, you know, the ultimate outcome is not guaranteed. But even if he survives, we're talking about a man who is going to be physically, um, not up to the task. And when we say up to the task, being a leader of Europe in opposition to European Union policies, NATO policies, in a nation that's fundamentally divided, you're constantly a political warfare. And so you wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night and you're active, you're active, you're active. It takes a toll on the body. And none of these politicians are young, spry men. They're all men of a certain age that I can sympathize with. And when you wake up in the morning, you got aches and pains. You're tired already. And now you got to roll into a day that's just going to exhaust you. It's physically demanding work to be the prime minister of Slovakia in this time. So he's not going to be up to it, which means he's going to be, delegating a lot of his, responsibilities to other people who may not be up to the task or may have other agendas. We don't know. And then there's something else too. Again, go back to Ronald Reagan. Prior to being the assassination, he was hardcore anti-Soviet, hardcore. And this is a guy that could joke about sending nuclear missiles to the Soviet Union. I mean, he's a man who, if you take a look at his rise through power, tended to minimize the Soviet nuclear capabilities, maximize American potential, and lean forward into the potential of confrontation, even if it was nuclear. But after he got shot, he was confronted with his mortality, and he talks about this, and his biographers talk about this, about how he responded to being shot. While he was recovering, ABC, the network, put out uh, the last day or something of that nature. The day after, I think it might have been the name of the show, is a series about nuclear war. And Reagan watches because he's in the hospital watching that, and he turns to his advisors and said, "Is it going to be like that?" And his advisor said, "No, it's going to be much worse." And he went, "How can it be worse than that?" And they said, "Well, it's going to be much worse." And that's where he sort of had an epiphany, and he went, "I don't want to." And that's when, you remember, I keep talking about the June 24th, 1982 million-person march in Central Park. It resonated with Reagan because now he was receptive to it. He said, "I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to, listen." And this led to him taking a more open-minded approach on arms control that led to the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and set the stage for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Um, I don't believe any of that would have happened if he hadn't been shot, to be honest, because he was a different man before he got shot. What's Fico going to do? Okay, he was shot. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the man at all. Um, I believe he's a man of strong beliefs. He's obviously a man who's willing to fight for what he believes in. But now he's been shot. He might be in an induced coma right now, but when he comes out of it, I can guarantee you there's going to be a moment of reflection on him. He's been confronted by his mortality. And how's he going to respond? I mean, he could go even more hardcore, or he could soften. The thing is, there's a big uncertainty now that's been injected into this just by the reality of human nature. We don't know how he's going to emerge from this, both from his health and from his overall belief system, that which defined who he was and why he took the political stances that he took. Um, so we have to see. Now, I don't think the Ukrainian conflict poses the kind of existential threat to Slovakia that nuclear conflict posed to Reagan. So I don't suddenly see Fico waking up going, screw it, give them all everything we got, empty the arsenal, give it all to Ukraine, let it happen. I don't see that happening, but I do think that he may reflect upon the situation inside Slovakia that led to the motivation of this 71-year-old writer to pull the trigger. And why did he pull the trigger? Why did he view me as a threat? What is it about what I'm doing that makes half the country think, that they have to physically oppose what I'm doing? Why is my Minister of Interior telling me that we're on the cusp of civil war? Now he reflects on that in a hospital in a weakened moment, and who knows how he's going to emerge from this? We don't know.
Thank you, Scott. Let's go to Ukraine now. Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky, warns that there is a danger of Russian troops moving behind the Ukrainian forces in the Kharkiv region. Zelensky just announced that they are relocating some more troops from other regions to that area. And President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, who is ending his trip to China, by the way, everyone knows. Putin said that Russia has no plans to seize Kharkov as of today. And more from Putin. Now, quoting, now about what is happening in the Kharkov direction, they, meaning the Ukrainian authorities, are also to blame for that because they shield and continue shelling, unfortunately, residential areas of borderline territories, including Belgorod. Civilians are being killed there. It is all obvious. I have said publicly that if this continues, we will have to create a security buffer zone. This is what we are doing, end of quote. Scott, I would like to ask you how big, in your opinion, this buffer zone will be? How far it will go?
I think the Russians will look at the range of the weapons that have been used against them and build a buffer zone that's designed to keep the Ukrainian weapon systems out of range of Russian villages. It'll be a significant buffer zone. I think we should be measured in evaluating President Putin's words. I believe him when he says that the goal is a buffer zone, not to capture Kharkov. That means that the operational intent of this offensive is to push the Ukrainians back all along the border region to get them outside of the range arcs of their weapon systems. But I'm pretty sure that Kharkov is going to fall within that buffer zone. So we'll see what happens there. But there's a difference that that means that the big arrows aren't going to necessarily be going to envelop Kharkov. The big arrows are going to be, instead of big arrows to envelop Kharkov, you're going to be looking at just a pushing the Ukrainians back. And you can achieve that any number of ways. I mean, one of the things that the Russians have been seeking to do since 2022 through this attritional warfare is to get the Ukrainian defenses to collapse, meaning that you've overextended them and you've ground them down so that they have insufficient forces to man the totality of the line. Do you remember in the fall of 2022 how quickly the Ukrainians advanced when they moved into the Kharkov region and how quickly the Russians withdrew? The reason for that is that the Russians had insufficient forces deployed to the front lines. The Ukrainians were able to penetrate the Russian defenses up to depths of 10 to 20 kilometers, putting the Russians in a untenable situation, compelling a rapid withdrawal to a line of defense that could be held with the forces available. That's what's about to happen to the Ukrainians. They don't have the forces now to hold the line. They've already robbed Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. They've stripped forces away from Chasiv Yar. They've stripped forces away from Kherson, Zaporizhia. They sit their reserves, the last remaining reserves, all to Kharkov to create this new front. They're stripping everybody to come up with forces to thinly hold a line that isn't holding. Russia, meanwhile, still has 150 to 200,000 troops that have yet to be committed to this fight. And Russia's just going to continue to, we're going to put another 40,000 over here towards Sumy. What are you going to do? Oh, we got to strip more people, thinner. Boom, we're gonna put a new offensive down in the Zaporizhia area. What are you going to do? Then thin them out of Odessa. Boom, we're going to do another push in Kupiansk. What are you going to do? We don't have anybody left. Collapse. Boom. And that's the direction the Russians heading right now. They're basically thinning out the Ukrainian defenses, extending them, continuing to grind them down. And, Ukraine is losing men and material at a far greater rate than they can replace them. and Russia's accumulating military power at a far greater rate than Ukraine can attrit it. Russia's getting stronger every day. Ukraine's getting weaker. And eventually the military math, just points to an inevitable outcome. I've been saying this for a long time. I mean, this is the most predictable outcome in the world, just again, from a pure military math standpoint. The interesting thing is that you're starting to see the mainstream media in the West, they brought in some mathematicians instead of propagandists. The mathematicians are going, the numbers don't add up. They don't have enough manpower. No kidding. And finally the West is waking up to this reality, which is why for the first time you're starting to hear some interesting. Normally, we have stuttering Stoltenberg up there, doing his little Norwegian twitch in front of the camera. But now he said something interesting to a group that he spoke to the other day about the reconstruction of Ukraine. He said, well, there won't be a reconstruction of Ukraine if Ukraine doesn't win. Well, yeah, Ukraine's not going to win. So there's not going to be a reconstruction, not a NATO paid reconstruction. People are waking up to this reality. This is where we're at now. You're going to see some desperation. You're going to see some talk out of the Western powers about, well, then we have to do X to make up for the lack of Y. Send troops in, and just watch how that quickly dissipates because the situation is so dire. I mean, Macron, we're going to send in the French. How many? How many can you send in? Because that's a limitation. That's a bottleneck there. And when the answer is not that many, for instance, to hold Odessa, you need 60,000 backed up by another 80,000. How many can you send in? Maybe 2,000 backed up by 12,000. Not enough. The inevitability of military math means you're going to lose. And then what happens? F-16s. Everybody's talking about sending F-16s, and A, it's not a very good fighter aircraft. B, it's flown by Ukrainian pilots who aren't that good. And C, you're operating out of air bases that are very vulnerable to the Russians. And D, they'll all be killed within the first 24 to 48 hours of employment. They're not going to have any impact, which is why NATO's delaying their delivery. Because the last thing NATO wants to do as Ukraine is collapsing, saying, here's our latest miracle weapon, the one that's been sold as the game changer. Here it is, guys, the F-16, pop, 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 pop. They're all dead. And you suddenly have the F-16 joining up with the Leopard, the Marder, the M1, the Bradley, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the M777s, the Patriots, all the magic Western systems that are supposed to be so technologically superior to the Russians, and they've all been destroyed by the Russians. They're going to add the F-16 to that. And air power is sort of the last chapter of the mythology of the superiority of the West. Well, we have better air power. We have better airplanes. We can dominate the skies. And when the F-16s drop out of the sky, you lose that as well. So I don't know if any F-16s will be delivered given the pace of Ukraine's collapse.
Thank you so much for this. I really hope you're right. In this, I put my hope that they will not use us here, European Union people and others, to go into this project. I really hope, Scott. I really do. One question from the viewer. Anya, if you read this, maybe Scott knows what countries were around the table in Istanbul in March 2022. I know France, Germany, Turkey, and what here is, this is the truth that Boris Johnson told Zelensky to be. So this is my last question for today, everyone.
Well, I mean, ultimately, who was around the table were Russia and Ukraine, with Turkey moderating. Hovering in the wings were France and Germany, the Minsk, the people involved in Minsk, and then the United Kingdom, the United States were further out. France and Germany were not at the table. I don't believe. If you're willing to correct me on this one, I'll take the correction. But my understanding is that this was purely a Russian-Ukrainian negotiation, moderated by Turkey. Whether the Russians and Ukrainians actually sat apart from, across from each other, or if they were separated by a room with the Turks running interference, I don't know the details to that. I know in Belarus during the 3 rounds that they had in Gomel, they sat across from each other, and I have every reason to believe that in this case that would be the case. They would sit around with each other, then retreat back to different anterooms. Now, in the anteroom over here, where the Ukrainians are considering what the Russians have put in, there might be French and German presence, direct or indirect, where they're finding out what the Russians are doing, sending cables back home, trying to get the feedback to them. I believe that's the case because Boris Johnson did have some insight into what was being offered the Ukrainians. And he realized that if the Ukrainians accepted this, that it was all over, that it was the end of Ukraine and NATO, the end of this effort to bring down Russia. Everything the West had positioned itself to do couldn't be done because Ukraine was going to stop the war. And so he came in and he sabotaged. Now, to this day, he denies doing that, but I think the record is clear that Boris Johnson came in and let the Ukrainians know that there would be no continued assistance if the Ukrainians signed on to this this Istanbul communique that they were talking about. So, that's it. Was there a part two of that question, or was that did I answer the question?
You did. Actually, as I always say, my last, and then I have one more. We still have time for one more.
Sure.
In relation to this, President Putin, I think today, during his visit to China, he said that Russia, as he repeats often, is always willing to have a peace negotiations, but who is there to trust? He actually said it. Who is there to trust to sign this peace with? So, Scott, as I understand, and it makes sense to me, they want to keep Zelensky alive for probably tribunals in the future for crimes against humanity and other things. But so who will sign this peace? Who will be there to trust when this moment comes to sign this peace?
Well, let's go back to the Istanbul communique. Zelensky would have signed it. Russia was willing to negotiate with Zelensky, even though they didn't like him, even though they blamed him for all of this. And if you look at the Istanbul communique and the terms that Russia was putting on the table, some would say that Ukraine won the war. I mean, these were very favorable terms for Ukraine. They had to swallow some hard truths. Those hard truths were they're not getting Crimea back, and the Donbass that's up in the air, and the prevalent feeling the Donbass is they don't want to be part of Ukraine, so they have to be respected. That's what William Burns, by the way, the CIA director, warned about in 2008. I mean, every once in a while the CIA does get it right. Now he was a U.S. ambassador at that time, which is why we should put even more credence to what he was saying. But he said if we NATO invite Ukraine to join NATO, this will lead to a civil war in Ukraine. What do you think the Maidan was? It was a CIA instigated civil war against Ukrainian nationalists and Viktor Yanukovych and the Eastern Ukrainians / ethnic Russians. That was the purpose of it, to pit them against one another, a final political engagement to destroy, from the Western perspective, the political viability of the Russians. This is why you see the aggressive follow through. Nothing happens in a vacuum. The reason why the right sector, Azov, went to Odessa and assaulted and burned those people to death is that their job was to intimidate the Russians, to drive them out. That they tried to do the same thing in April in Crimea. They sent a freedom train there, but the Russians there rose up and held them back. The little green men came in and Russia took control of that situation. They went to Mariupol. You've seen the video of what happened in Mariupol, the rape of Mariupol, where the Ukrainians came in, the Ukrainian army came in and slaughtered people and forcefully occupied this Russian city. And that's created the birth of the Azov battalion, the Azov regiment, Azov C, right there. They made that their headquarters, the symbol of Western Ukrainian nationalism, Banderist ideology being plucked down in a Russian city right there in Eastern Ukraine. And they wanted to move on and do the same thing to Donetsk and Lugansk. But there was opposition to that. William Burns predicted all of this. He said this will lead to a civil war where Russia will have to make a decision to intervene, and they probably will, which means we now have a war with Russia. And he said at the end of the day, Ukraine's going to lose at a minimum Crimea and the Donbass. Well, the Istanbul communique was William Burns' predictions played out. Russia said, you've lost Crimea, you're never getting that back. And Donbass, you're not going to get that back either, but everything else is yours. Kherson, Zaporizhia, today they're part of Russia forever. Ukraine will never get them back. But at the time of the Istanbul communique, those were going back. Kharkov, Sumy, Chernihiv, all those districts around Kiev where the Russian forces had been in, the Russians voluntarily withdrew as a good faith measure, saying, we're serious, we are going to pull back. And then Russia was willing to allow for these security guarantees. They gave Article 5 like protection, meaning that if Russia attacked, Russia, it would say you can have security guarantees that say other nations can come in. It just won't be NATO, but you can do bilateral agreements so that Ukraine can be safe in the knowledge that Russia had no further territorial acquisition intent, because Russia never did have territorial acquisition intent. It wasn't until the Ukrainians threatened Crimea to kick the Russians out after a coup that Russia said, no, we're keeping that. And it wasn't until they went into the Donbass that the Russians said, we're not going to let you do that either. But look what happened in Odessa. They burned the Russians, 84 Russians to death, or 48. I flipped those numbers. I'm dyslexic, so I can't remember which one number is right. But the same thing in Mariupol. Russia said no. But so Russia was willing to negotiate with Zelensky, despite all of this history, to bring it into the conflict on favorable terms. And then even after that, Russia said, okay, you've opted out of this. 48, thank you, Cochise. Like I said, dyslexic. Every once in a while I flip numbers. But the Russians said, okay, you've made this decision to attack us. We now have to consolidate our gains. We're in Kherson and Zaporizhia. We're keeping it. And so that's when they had the referendum. They kept the Donbass. They kept Kherson, Zaporizhia. Those are part of Russia forever. Ukraine will never get those back, and they'll never get Ukraine back. And this is what Russia kept telling Ukraine. We're willing to sit down. Most of those terms that we put on the table for the Istanbul communique are in play today, except the fact that these territories that are Russia are going to be forever Russia. And when we say forever, we mean forever. You'll never get them back, ever. And this is what Russia kept saying. You have to be realistic. You have to be realistic. And Ukraine isn't realistic. They're talking about getting everything back plus Crimea, plus war reparations, plus all this. Russia was willing to do away with, hardcore denazification, hardcore demilitarization. They were willing to let Ukraine, survive as a nation state and work with Zelensky to make that happen. The negotiating table is there. All Ukraine had to do is come in and say, all right, we agree to this, but no NATO, no this, no that. The same Istanbul communique. Zelensky wouldn't do it. And so Russia has been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, they're at the point right now where Zelensky's, I don't know if everybody realizes, Zelensky's off the table. He's been put on a wanted list. So his future is guaranteed. Stay in Ukraine, you're going to die, or you're going to Russian prison to be prosecuted for war crimes. Starting on May 20th, they're going to say he's not the legitimate president of Ukraine, which means, A, they would never negotiate with a criminal, but B, they're not going to negotiate with him. So they're going to turn to the Ukrainians and say, if you want to end this thing, it ain't going to be him. It's got to be somebody else. And the terms are not going to be what you think they are. Everything we had on the table is off the table now. Everything we had on the table, off the table.
So, Scott, there will be no peace. It will be just taking over. That's it, finito.
Again, I'm not a Russian, and I can't say, look, if you had asked me what I thought the Istanbul communique would have contained, before Russia went public with it, my terms would have been much harsher. I would never in my life have believed that the Russians were going to put forward the terms that they put forward. So I would caution people, and I caution myself on a regular basis, trying to read too much into this, meaning there's people who say Odessa is going to be a Russian city no matter what. And I agree with that, but I'm not Putin. There's people that say Kharkov is going to be a Russian city no matter what. And I agree with that, but I'm not Putin. The Russians have to deal, Vladimir Putin has to deal with far more complicated issues and more important issues than appeasing me and all the people out there that want Odessa and Kharkov to be Russian. He has to deal with, look at what he just did with the Minister of Defense. I mean, Sergei Shoigu did a miraculous job of mobilizing, of getting the Russian army turned around from this peacetime rot that it had. Maybe he's to blame for some of that rot. That, we got to be honest there. But he did turn it around. He got the defense industry up and running. But he did it in a way, You know how sometimes when we have I'll use myself as an example here, um, a plumbing emergency upstairs. The sink is leaking. It's gone to hell in a handbasket. Now, there's a couple ways to deal with this. Shut off the water at the source, call in a professional plumber and fix it, or you can marine it, which is go in with duct tape and just start wrapping duct tape until it stops leaking and keep wrapping afterwards. And you go, ha ha, I solved the problem, but you didn't solve anything. You just put a lot of duct tape on the problem. Um, the people that say take Kharkov, take Odessa, they're the duct tape people. They're me. You're going for the obvious, quick solution. Um, Vladimir Putin realizes that there's a systemic problem, that you actually have to shut down the water and you have to deal with the whole system. When he looks at Sergei Shoigu duct taped defense industry. He got that thing up and running. I mean, it's great what's going on, but it's the Russian economy is too hot right now, meaning that the defense industry has created an imbalance between defense industry and a civilian industry at a time when civilian industry, the very survival of Russia depends on a stable civilian industry. Russia could undo all of the victories it achieved in combating Western sanctions by creating an imbalance in its economic posture that's unsustainable, so that in the next 3 to 5 years, Russian economy collapses. You can't do that when you have international sanctions in play. You have to keep your economy healthy. And so he has to take a systemic approach to how do I fix this economy? So he brought in Andrei Belousov. I'm guilty of butchering every name, and I'm trying not to butcher that one. But they brought him in. He's an economist. Like, oh, he doesn't know anything about the military. He knows more about the military than you do. Anybody who says that, more about the military than I do. He's been a deputy prime minister. He's served as the actual prime minister of Russia when the other prime minister got sick. The real prime minister got sick with COVID. He's an advisor to the Russian president on economic issues. He has the ear. This is a guy who predicted the 2008, recession in Russia. He predicted the 2012 dip in the economy back when everybody else in Russia was going, no, 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 boom. And Putin's going, well, wait a minute. Belousov told me it was going to happen. It happened exactly the way he said it was. Same thing with 2012. And now, so this guy's coming in saying, hey, boss, we got to balance this or we got problems. And Putin says, okay, you got it. I anoint you the balancer of the economy. And his job is to come in and balance the economy. That means that you got to get artificialities out of the way. You know what's the greatest artificiality out there? War. War is the greatest artificiality. It's not real. I mean, it's real while it's happening, but that's not how the world tends to work. So this war has to come to an end. Now, it'll come to an end on terms favorable to Russia. But I think people who sit there and put, like me, I'm guilty of the same thing, that put absolute conclusions on there, that it must be this, it must be this. They must go to the Polish border. They must link up with Transnistria. They must do that. From Putin's perspective, it's, I have to save Russia. He keeps saying that Russia's in a very precarious situation, that Russia's under a lot of stresses. We tend to become very optimistic and therefore complacent when we look at how well Russia's doing. We don't realize that Russia's doing well because of a whole bunch of hard work by people who are, constantly facing crisis after crisis after crisis, each one of which could end all of this success that Russia's having. And so Putin said there, he knows that sometimes it's a crapshoot. Sometimes it wasn't guaranteed that it was going to go the way it went, that he got a little lucky there. Now, he, as a good leader, you exploit luck and then you try to make luck systemic and therefore you advance the problem. But I think we have to understand that Putin's goals and objectives are strategic in nature and they're focused on things like BRICS. How does Russia become a leader in BRICS? And how does BRICS become a leader in the new multipolar world? And if Russia is going to take a leadership position in that, which is going to affect how the world operates for the next century, how important does Odessa become at that point in time? Maybe you can come up with a solution that keeps Odessa in Ukraine, but makes Ukraine part of a political and economic union with Russia. Therefore, you control Odessa without having to conquer Odessa. These are the things that are going on inside the Kremlin that he's dealing with, and I think we have to understand that he's operating on a completely different stage than most of us mere observers who allow emotions to get in way of practicalities.
Mr. Scott Ritter, everyone. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining me today. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys, for watching. Make sure to hit this like before you go. It's free of charge. It helps the channel. Please share our live stream as well. And until next time, thank you very much.